Hello humans, and welcome back to another episode of Sparks the Conversation. Hope you are well wherever you are in this world, whatever you are doing. I hope you're having a good day, good life, and the weather is treating you well. So the topic of today's podcast is going to be about deloads, okay? Because one of the main things that's happening at the moment is clients will come to me, and in the onboarding process, so the part of the relationship building with the client where we get to understand a bit about them, their training history, their training age, I will always ask, when was the last time you had a deload? The most obvious answer that people say is, what is a deload? And yes, this is if you've never been coached before, because you probably didn't realize that you needed to, or anything along those lines. But in essence, when was the last time you had programmed time off from the gym? If you've had a coach and they haven't done this for you, ask your coach why you haven't had these. And the basic understanding of deloads or programmed periods of rest is fatigue management. Management. And that often gets sprayed around in the industry a lot. Fatigue management, fatigue this, fatigue that. The basic understanding is that we need time away from the gym or times of lower stress within a training block so that we can buffer fatigue. Because if you think about training and if you think about a training cycle, so let's say on average, most people will potentially get around 8 weeks in a training cycle. Some people might be doing more, some people might do less. Cancel me, I don't give a shit. As a result of that training block, you will see that fatigue incrementally goes up. And the hope is that alongside that, your performance incrementally goes up. But obviously, across a training block, you want to be getting stronger, potentially moving weights better, improving your form, all of these different ways that you could be progressively loading. And at some point, and again, this is completely personal, your fatigue will go higher than your training performance, and subsequently your training performance will go down. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see me do something with my hands. If you're listening on podcast world, you're just gonna have to envision what I'm doing. So I'm gonna have one line, and this is your performance. So throughout the training cycle, your performance, if it's programmed well and you're doing the right things, you're eating enough, will go up. Alongside that is fatigue. So ideally, or in a make-believe world, they'd run parallel to each other, and your fatigue would never cross over your performance. But what we see a lot of is your training performance goes up, but after a while, your fatigue will creep up your training performance. And this will mean that you'll really start to struggle. You'll be in the hurt locker, as we might say, or if some pillocks call it, in the trenches, which is I don't know. I just don't think we should be calling dieting or training, making any kind of comparison to being in the trenches, because let's be honest, we've got an easy life. But anyway, I digress. So when fatigue gets high, chances are you'll start to feel fatigued, obviously, tired, grouchy, your performance will be shit, you might lose your appetite, sleep might be all over the place, you might be more irritable than usual. And in this period, you're more likely to pick up injuries. And I can honestly say, I wish I knew this when I first started out, because I don't think I took a day off through choice for at least 5 years. And that is not me saying, oh, I'm hardcore, I can train for 5 years. I'm an idiot, because this just wasn't talked about back then. So what can you do with a deload? What should you do with a deload, and how do I approach it with clients and myself? So across a training block, again, we'll be monitoring how a client will feel. A lot of the time, if you start to track data and you start to understand the relationship between quantifiable data and how you are feeling, you'll start to see that at certain points in a training cycle, you'll just generally start to feel a little bit off. For people who are very determined, very, stubborn, this might be a bit later on, because they'll want to not admit, quote unquote, defeat in the fact that they need to actually have time off. And what you'll find is that data will gradually indicate that that person is needing some rest. And the main one for lots of people is, especially for people who actually enjoy going to the gym, their enjoyment and their motivation to actually be in that gym, which normally is sky high because they see it as something they value, and they're not getting that anymore. And that will mean to me that you need to have a deload. And there's different approaches of deloads. So one of the most common is time away from the gym. And who does this work best for? So I find this works best for people who, if they go to a gym, really struggle just not to be all in. So for people like myself, if I find myself in a gym, I absolutely hate just spinning my wheels. and doing less than I know I can be doing. So for myself and my own kind of personal psychology, just not being in the gym gives me that psychological break and almost allows me to switch off from the gym. Bear in mind, this is my job, and everything I do, lives, breathes, drinks, eats fitness, clients fitness. It really does help me kind of detach myself from that. And even myself will find myself at the end of a training block, that kind of just zip for training will just go. So I will plan to have around minimum 4 days off from the gym. And what this normally looks like is 4 straight days off from the gym, nothing fancy. And of course, some people will say that this isn't optimal. You're detraining potentially, you're leaving press on the door, but the amount I train, so I train 14 times a week, and it really does allow me just that time to actually fully recover. There is another approach called a devolume approach, which is where you go in, you do your usual training program, but you just do less than you normally would. This is a good option if you're just getting into training and potentially you don't want to lose those motor patterns that you're just beginning to learn. And you just really, really, really enjoy being in the gym no matter what. Maybe it's your social setting, maybe it's somewhere where you go with your partner to bond and kind of spend quality time with each other. Maybe you being in the gym is better for you than you being out the gym. So devolume would be perfectly fine. And how I would set this up is normally, well, always you'd be wanting to reduce intensity. So intensity will be right down. So let's say you're normally training within 2 or 1 or 0 reps of failure, depending on who you are. If you're hardcore, 0. If you're normal person, probably 2. And hardcore doesn't mean better, by the way, in all aspects of life. You'd go in and you would do your normal training program, but you would just bring that volume and that intensity down. So for example, let's say you normally do 3 sets on, let's just say a chest press. You would do 1 set and you would go nowhere near failure. So you'd use your numbers and your data that you've tracked over the mesocycle for how you normally perform. And you would then just work way away from that. And the goal here is that you keep your motor units going. So if you're learning movements, you don't de-train them and de-learn them. And it also gets some movement in there. And if you think, or if you look at some of the research into kind of blood flow and so on and so forth, it might be beneficial to keep these things going. This is a devolume because you are lowering the volume that you are doing within a week as opposed to a normal training week. There is also a thing called a pivot week, which is not something I would potentially use with my clients, just because they tend to be a little bit more physique based. But a pivot week is used a lot in strength training, which is where instead of having a week off, you have a week where you do different training. The pros of this are that you might enjoy it loads. You might find new exercises that you really agree with. But the cons for me are that if you introduce a new training style or a new exercise in the week that you're meant to be recovering, chances are you'll be introducing a new stimulus that's just going to really F you up. For example, that's like going and doing, let's say you always do like a hack squat and you go in and do 3 sets of front squat. You're probably going to be sore from that. And the goal from this week is not for you to be absolutely bollocks. It's for you to actually reduce fatigue. I might have absolutely butchered what a pivot week is, but that's my understanding of it. You just do different exercises and you probably reduce intensity as well. Another common favorite within my coaching kind of clients is the hybrid model of that. So the hybrid model of time off and time in the gym. So if you're on a push-pull lower training program, you might train an upper session and a lower session within a 6-day period at lower volume. So you kind of combine the exercises that you want to keep fresh and the exercise that you have across your training week. And then the other days you're actually taking time off the gym. And I think for lots of people, this combines the perfect amount of in the gym and out the gym. It's not out the gym that they lose their mojo and they lose their incentive to ever go back, but it also gives them that time in the gym to keep those motor units they want to improve going. And it also gives them that time where they can just fully detach from the gym. They don't have to think about it. They can just get on with their lives. Because you'd be amazed how much time you have when you don't train. So I don't understand how people who don't train moan they don't have time. Maybe they've got other commitments, and maybe I'm just being an arsehole as per usual, sorry, the internet. But nonetheless, those would be my main approaches for deloads and how to manage them. So if you have any questions about this, just give me a shout. And if you ever have a podcast topic or a question that you want more detailed information on, just give me a shout. If you've got to the end of the podcast, thank you very much. And if you are interested in online coaching, just give me a message on social media or email at projectsparks@gmail.com. You'd think after nearly 80 episodes I would be able to do that. However, probably had too much caffeine today and not enough sleep. So nonetheless, I hope you have a good day, a good life. Thank you for listening to another episode, and I'll speak to you all very, very soon.